Okay, well, happy Hanukkah, everybody. It's great to have you here, and thank you for joining. It's so wonderful to celebrate Hanukkah with parties and menorah lighting and donut eating and all the important customs of Hanukkah. It's also great to spend some time thinking about the themes of Hanukkah and seeing how or if they continue to relate to our lives and how we could apply them to our lives. Um, Feel free to share questions or comments in the chat, which is open and ready for you if you want to make a comment or ask a question, or you could use the raise your hand function, which exists on Zoom, or you could actually raise your hand, but I don't see all of you at once on my screen. So it's probably better if you do one of the other things, or you can unmute yourself and try to get my attention by just calling out, which is my preferred method when I was in school. So that should work fine as well. So I want to just start by pointing out that many of the comments and ideas that I'm sharing with you tonight were inspired by Rabbi David Hartman. And if you've studied with me before, there's a chance that you've heard me talk about him and share some of his Torah. His teaching has always been very meaningful to me. So tonight is no exception. So we're going to look at a number of sources, two sources really, that talk about what we're celebrating on Hanukkah, and again see how they apply beyond Hanukkah. So the first source is a source from the Talmud, relatively famous, called My Hanukkah. Right, that's right up here in the Hebrew. In the English, what is Hanukkah? And really, what the up until that point, the context of the Talmud is that there has been an ongoing discussion about how to light the Hanukkah candles, where to light the Hanukkah candles, when to light the Hanukkah candles, and then the Talmud says, well, that's really well and good, but why are we lighting the Hanukkah candles? Right? What are we celebrating? And so the Talmud answers. The Tanu Rabbanan, the sages taught. I'll just read it in English for the sake of time. On the 25th of Kislev, the days of Hanukkah are 8. One may not eulogize on them, and one may not fast on them. When the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled all the oils that were in the sanctuary by touching them. And when the Hashmonaim monarchy overcame them and emerged victorious over them, they searched and found only one cruse of oil that was placed with the seal of the Kohen Gadol, of the high priest. And there was sufficient oil there to light the candelabrum for only one day. A miracle occurred, and they lit the candelabrum from it 8 days. The next year, the sages instituted these days and made them holidays with the recitation of Hallel and special thanksgiving in prayer and blessing. So it's interesting, just a few interesting notes, that this is the source that we have for the miracle of the oil. There are other rabbinic sources that talk about celebrating Hanukkah, but they do not mention the miracle of the oil. What's also interesting to note here is that the way that the rabbis tell us to celebrate Hanukkah in this text is not by lighting a Chanukiah, right? Is not by lighting the Hanukkah menorah, but instead to engage in Hallel, which is praise and thanksgiving to God, right? Which we do. We still do that, of course. In the Shacharit service, we add Hallel, which is additional chapters of Tehillim, the chapters of Psalms, and in the Amidah of all of the services that we recite on Chanukah, we add Al Hanisim, right? A special prayer, which we'll get to a little bit later, a special prayer of praise to God for the miracle. It says that there was a miracle and the oil lasted for 8 days, but what we are supposed to do to celebrate is to offer praise and thanksgiving, which I think is just a point in and of itself, worthy of stopping and considering for a moment. In terms of, Our religion, our practices are often made up of external physical acts, like lighting the Hanukkah, having a Passover Seder, lighting Shabbat candles, right? But there's also, I shouldn't say also, maybe even primarily an inner element, right? That's what this is talking about. And I think it's interesting here that the rabbis are saying that the primary way to celebrate Hanukkah is with an internal feeling, right? When we pray, no one hears us say these things. Prayer is, we pray together in a group often, but prayer is a private, individual action activity. And I find it interesting that on the holiday that we so connect to a public, physical expression of the holiday. And the truth is, the reason why many of us customarily light our Hanukkah menorahs in the window is because we're supposed to publicize it. But nonetheless, the rabbis focused here on the internal element. And it could be, I recently came across this idea in something else I was reading about Hanukkah on Shabbat. It could be as well that the purpose of lighting the Hanukkah candles is in order to, I'll use a Hanukkah term, to ignite something internal in us. I mean, the Hanukkah candles in and of themselves may not be inherently valuable, but when we light a Hanukkah candle, which reminds us of a miracle, then we internalize it, right? And we engage in that sort of a private, introspective moment of Hallel, of praise and thanksgiving. So I think that's just maybe another way to think about Hanukkah. And when we light the Hanukkah, the Hanukkah menorah, over the next, we still have 6 nights left, right? We can reflect internally on the blessings in our lives, and I think that Hanukkah invites us not only to think about the miracle of Hanukkah, but invites us to think about all the points of light that we have in our life, right? All of the blessings that we have in our life, which we should be doing all the time. But Hanukkah, to use a term which we're now all familiar with, is a booster shot, right? Hanukkah comes and it reminds us that there are wonderful, even miraculous things in this world. Some of them are obvious, but if we spend some time, even the ones that are not so obvious can come to the foreground of our mind, and that could be a beautiful way to internalize and really make meaning out of Hanukkah. So that's sort of point one. Now I want to move on to, and again, if anyone has a comment or something they want to add, please feel free to use the chat or again, try to get my attention some other way. Rabbi Hartman, commenting on this prayer, he writes as follows: although there may have been sufficient oil in the cruse of oil which had been ritually defiled, Jews insisted on using only pure oil, even though the quantity found appeared to be insufficient. So what he's getting at here is, as we read in that passage from the Talmud, there was only one cruse of oil that was still pure, but there was plenty of impure oil. So why not use the impure oil? It's a famous question. Why not use the impure oil? So Rabbi Hartman says the willingness to rely on one small but pure cruse of oil symbolized the reluctance to compromise their standards of excellence and moral ideals. I think it's such a beautiful idea. Light, I think, here for Rabbi Hartman represents this moral ideal. And it's true, the Chashmonaim, the rabbis at the time, could have used the impure oil. And this is true also on technical, halachic, legal grounds, that they could have lit with the impure oil, but they chose not to. Right? They chose not to because, for whatever reason, they did not want to, as Rabbi Hartman puts it, compromise their standards. They want to, even in a very difficult time, they wanted to maintain high standards. Now, this is not always appropriate, right? Sometimes we have to compromise And we'll see that a little bit later. And sometimes compromise is even worthy of celebration. Right? We call politics the art of compromise. Sometimes Jewish law is the art of compromising between two positions that seem to clash, and we have to find a place in the middle. But at that point, maybe because the Jewish people were under the gun, quite literally, right? We're not going to compromise, and we're going to use whatever we have that's pure, and we're going to hope for the best. We'll come back to that thought a little bit later. But again, something for us to think about, right, in terms of our own standards in religious life and in life in general, right? When do we compromise? When do we not compromise? When is it a good idea? When is it not a good idea? How do we feel when we compromise? It's a complicated question, because usually there are other people involved in the decisions we make in life. So even when we want to compromise, when we don't want to compromise, it may have a negative effect on someone else, or the other way around. If we do compromise, that may have a negative effect on someone else. So the idea that the Hashmonaim of that time chose not to compromise really raises an interesting thing, interesting idea, interesting question for us in our own lives, religiously, in all of our relationships with individuals, with institutions, with ourselves, with God. Right? That's such a huge idea about when are we willing to give up something in order to get something else. And here they weren't, but I don't think that that's necessarily always the case. But I would maybe in case of morality, that should be always the case. Along those same lines, there's a famous question mentioned by Rabbi Yosef Karo. I'm just going to insert numbers here so we can see. Okay, in source number 5, Rabbi Yosef Karo is the author of the Shulchan Aruch, the Jewish Code of Law, and he asks an interesting question. And see if we can get some sort of poll if you've ever thought of this question before. We celebrate Hanukkah for 8 days, but there was enough oil for 1 day, which leads him to ask why we then celebrating for 8. If the miracle we're celebrating is that the oil lasted for 8 days and it was only supposed to last for 1 day, I'm not a mathematician, but that's a 7-day miracle, not an 8-day miracle, right? So why are we celebrating for 8 days instead of 7 days? And there are a number of famous answers, and I'll share some of them with you, and then I'll share Rabbi Hartman's approach. But first, anyone want to answer that question? I'll move my answer so no one's attempted to look ahead. Anyone want to answer the question? If the oil lasted only for an additional 7 days, why celebrate for 8? Okay, Carol.
Well, the fact that they even found one vial in the destroyed temple,
Okay.
I mean, that was a miracle too.
Great. And Blake texted in to the chat, Blake Cohen. It may have been a miracle that there was any oil left at all. So similar idea. Okay, right. We'll go in order of my screen. So Miriam and then Diane.
Never mind, Carol said 9.
Okay, great. Diane, please unmute. I can't hear you, Diane. Oh, there we go. Go ahead. Start again.
During the holiday of Sukkot, of course, the temple was in the possession of the Syrian Greeks. And so Sukkot could not be honored. And so once the temple was rededicated, that pilgrimage holiday, which was so important, I'm sure, to the Judean population at that time, was able to be celebrated, and so it was.
Excellent. And that is Nada Chandler, also texted in, similar idea to celebrate Sukkot. So just for those of you who may have missed that, In fact,
Would
there are
Sukkot have been 7 days in Israel?
well,
Not
no,
8?
because plus Shmini Atzeret.
Yeah, we did that study at Rich Shalom the other day with the rabbinical intern, and she went over that, though I already knew that. But
Right.
The quotes, the text she used had Shmini Atzeret as
Right.
included with that.
Exactly. So what's really interesting about this answer is that there is some literature from that period that indicates that Hanukkah was originally celebrated at the time of Sukkot, not where we celebrate it now, and somehow it migrated to where we celebrate it now. But so that's another approach. Oh, any other suggestions? I'll quickly scroll through my screen and see if anyone has their hand up as to why we celebrate 8 days instead of 7. Okay, so I'll share with you the 3 answers on the source sheet and then Rabbi Hartman's answer. So one is they split the oil into 8 parts and put 1 part, an eighth of what was needed, into the menorah each night, and nonetheless it lasted until the morning. Hence, there was a miracle each night. Okay, we're really splitting hairs here when it comes to these answers. Number 2, all of the oil was placed in the menorah, but the cruise remained full. So there was a visible miracle each night, right? The oil never burned down, sort of like the burning bush of Moses that never got consumed. And 3, on the first night, all of the oil was placed in the menorah, and even though it burned all night, in the morning, the menorah cups were still full. So we have these different approaches, all very technical, and plus the ones that were mentioned already are all very lovely. Rabbi Hartman says this, which I found really moving. What strikes me as being the miraculous feature of the initial day was the community's willingness to light the lamp in spite of the fact that its anticipated period of burning was short-lived, right? Meaning, what one reaction of the Chashmonaim could have been, what's the use? So we'll get 1 night. Then we're going to go until at least 7 days until we can get new oil again. What's the point? Let's just wait until everything's perfect, right? The miracle of the first day was expressed in the community's willingness to light a small cruse of oil without reasonable assurance that their efforts would be sufficient to complete the rededication of the temple. There's a major difference between us and the Chashmonaim when it comes to Hanukkah, which is they didn't know there was going to be a miracle, right? We know there's a miracle. They didn't know there was going to be a miracle. So why light? But nonetheless, Rabbi Hartman says, Hanukkah celebrates the miracle expressed by those who lit the lamp, and not only the miracle of the lamp's continued burning for 8 days. That's beautiful. Those who lit the lamp, meaning those who are willing to take a step forward, even with uncertainty. The Hanukkah lights encourage one to trust human beginnings and to focus one's passions and efforts on whatever opportunities are available at the present moment. One ought to pour infinite yearnings even into small vestas. The strength to continue and to persevere grows by virtue of the courage to initiate a process by lighting the first flame. Only lamps which are lit may continue to burn beyond their anticipated lifespan. So in a nutshell, in a quip, Rabbi Hartman is saying the Chashmonaim did not overthink this. Had they overthought it, they may never have lit the lamp. And there would never have been a miracle. They were willing to look at the situation that they had, do the best they can, and say, well, we're going to really hope that it works out. And I found that to be such an important idea because sometimes we just don't start because we don't think our plans are perfect. And there's so many beautiful examples of this that I want to share with you. Abraham Joshua Heschel writes the following. A heretic, the Talmud reports, chided the Jews for the rashness in which he claimed they persisted. First, you should have listened in the commandments If the commandments were within your power of fulfillment, you should have accepted them. If beyond your power, rejected them. What Heschel is referring to here is the famous statement that the Jewish people made at Sinai, Na'aseh v'nishma, which means we will do and we will listen. And this heretic is saying the Jews were rash. They had it backwards. First, hear what's in it, and then decide if you're going to accept it. And then decide if you're going to do it. And he continues, indeed, Israel's supreme acquiescence at Sinai was an inversion, turning upside down the order of attitudes as conceived by our abstract thinking. Do we not always maintain that we first must explore a system before we decide to accept it? This order of inquiry is valid in regard to pure theory. This is Rabbi Hartman's answer. To principles and rules, but its limitations when applied to realms where thought and fact, the abstract and the concrete, theory and experience are inseparable. It would be futile, for example, to explore the meaning of music and abstain from listening to music. Such a powerful example. Jewish thought is disclosed in Jewish living. If you take anything away from tonight, that's it. Jewish thought is disclosed in Jewish living. This, therefore, is the way of religious existence. We do not explore first and decide afterwards whether to accept the Jewish way of living. We must accept in order to be able to explore. A Jew is asked to take a leap of action rather than a leap of thought. He is asked to surpass his needs. To understand. I messed up that quote, so forget that for now. But he's asked to take a leap of thought. And that is a beautiful, in my estimation, a beautiful summation of Judaism, right? There's only so much reading and thinking we can do. At some point, we have to do it. And if we do it, we'll appreciate it most of the time, right? If we explore it, actively doing it, this is almost the reverse of what I said at the outset, right? That Hanukkah is a time for us to think about points of light. But here, this notion that they did not overthink. We don't have enough oil. The oil it's not going to last. They saw the situation they had in front of them, and they went ahead to Jewish living. And the meaning comes with the action. The meaning comes with the action. There's a famous Talmudic statement that's just coming to my mind now, that if you meet someone who is sort of like a boorish person, it says, bring them into the Beit Midrash, bring them into the house of study, which for me is not only telling people to engage in intellectual theoretical study, but a Beit Midrash is a living place. A Jewish house of study is a living place where Jewish life is lived to the fullest, and that's what we're supposed to do. Rabbi Yehuda Amital, really a fascinating character, the founder of an important yeshiva in Israel, Holocaust survivor, talks about the Hashmonaim model when he talks about celebrating the land of Israel, celebrating the state of Israel, right? For example, but in the time of the Second Temple, things were imperfect, as is well known. The kings did not follow the correct tradition, and they would appoint the high priest by force, even though he was unworthy. The high priests of the Hashmonaim family were victorious and killed the Greeks, thus saving Israel from their hands. They established a king from among the priests, which was not allowed, and monarchy returned to Israel for over 200 years. Because of this, the scholars of that generation instituted that these 8 days, starting from the 25th of Kislev, shall be the days of joy and praise. But then he goes on to note this. The Second Temple period thus serves as a legitimate model by which we may assess the contemporary Jewish state. A half century after its establishment, however imperfect, one cannot overlook the many positive elements of our independent national existence. Our leaders today are no worse than the Hashmonaim kings, and our country is no worse than theirs was. To the contrary, our leadership and society often exhibit moral qualities far superior to those of the Hashmonaim dynasty. His point is, if you wait to celebrate the state of Israel or anything until it's perfect, you're just you're never going to get there. And that's the message of lighting the Hanukkah candles, even though of lighting the menorah in the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, even though they knew there wasn't enough oil and they did not know what was going to happen. Let me read you in this regard something else from Rabbi Hartman, which is not on the sheet. He says, only one who devotes even 15 minutes a day to learning will discover his latent powers to study and concentrate. Only he who breaks the chains of moral complacency by giving a minimal amount of tzedakah will discover greater capacities to respond to those in need. One brings children into the world without knowing whether one will be able to love and provide for their needs throughout a lifetime. That's maybe the best example, right? Who knows what's going to happen? Only in actually caring for one's children does one discover and expand one's capacity for love and concern. Human capacities and achievements grow as a result of action and not as a result of noble ideals and well-meaning intentions. The Hanukkah lamp burned for 8 days because of those who were prepared to have it burn for only 1 day. And I think it's a beautiful sentiment and message of Hanukkah. I found another element of it in a journal that I found online from 1947, written right after the UN vote on partition, and he bemoans that the partition plan is only giving the Jewish people a sliver of the Holy Land. But he says, so what? So we're not gonna come here and build the land because we don't have it all. We have to start with what we have. And so this idea just keeps reappearing over and over again. So that's sort of the second main idea that Rabbi Hartman mentions, which is lighting the Chanukiah. The reason we celebrate 8 days is because the first day, the miracle was the courage that the Jews had to forge ahead, even though it was uncertain. And even though they didn't know what was going to happen. And that becomes a central message for Rabbi Hartman and for Rabbi Amital and for the author of this journal, and in all of our lives, right? We again, this discussion of ours is about how the Hanukkah lessons appeal to us throughout our life. And I think about relationships when I think about this, right? Relationships are rarely perfect, even at the beginning. And they're scary, and we're uncertain. But if we waited until we felt 100% that it was going to be always perfect, maybe we would never, people would never couple up. People would never commit to organizations. People would never commit to ideas. And here we're learning that, of course, we have to not be foolish and foolhardy, but we also have to sometimes take a leap of action, as Heschel called it. Okay. Finally, on that same note, this beautiful statement that the rabbis were walking and they saw the daybreak and they saw the horizon getting lighter and brighter and brighter. And Rabbi Chia Rabbah said to Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta, in the school of Rabbi, they taught, so will the redemption of Israel at first, bit by bit, but as it goes on, it becomes progressively greater. Right? That's when you jump in, it's slow, but hopefully it gets brighter and brighter as we go. That's source number one that Rabbi Hartman talks about, the miracle of the oil and why we're celebrating for 8 days. Okay, I want to stop here and see if there's a comment or a question. I've been going on for quite some time. Anyone have any insights or applications of what we talked about that they'd like to share? Again, I'll scroll through the windows to see if there are any ideas. If anyone wants to share anything, I'll keep my eye on the chat as well. Okay. If there are no comments, then I will continue. Okay. Oh, okay. Go ahead, Diane, please.
Real quickly, the phrase that comes to mind when you talk about a lot of this is the notion of a leap of faith. You just have to believe in the future.
Ah, okay, that's interesting. Right. So I think that Rabbi Heschel was trying to move away from a leap of right. You're correct. Leap of faith, leap of action. I think here work the same. It's not quite the same as leap of a leap of thought. That's what That's what Rabbi Heschel was sort of working against. Leap of thought. Don't overthink things. Again, this could also not overthinking could be overdone as well. You don't want, like I said, be foolhardy, but well said, Diane. Okay. Now, another source for the miracle of Hanukkah is, as I mentioned earlier, the Al Hanisim prayer, which is a prayer that's recited when we pray in the Amidah. It's also recited in the Birkat Hamazon, in the grace after meals. And there's one point that I wanted to look at here. Hold on one second. We have a comment here from Amaka. Is it possible that the 8 days of lighting are the steps of faith we are expected to take, like those who lit the lamp? Yes, that's beautiful. Each day we grow in our faith, and that's why we light more and more candles as Hanukkah goes on to show that our faith is growing. Yes, very beautiful. Okay, I highlighted here in this source number 13, that talks about, again, another source for celebrating. Here, there's not talk of the miracle of the oil. There's talk of the miracle of the battle. And I noted, Virabim biyad me'atim, many into the hands of the few. And Rabbi Hartman here makes a beautiful point. He says, like the spirit of the Maccabean revolt, lighting the Hanukkah lamp is a public demonstration of Jewish life in defiance of an ethos which seeks to neutralize individuality and cultural diversity. And here, Rabbi Hartman tries to find some sort of balance between individuality, or what we'll call particularism, and universalism. And he sees that that's a main theme of the battle of the miracle, the celebration of Hanukkah. Although Jewish law stipulates that one candle each night on behalf of an entire family is legally sufficient, I'm not sure if you knew that, right? To fulfill the mitzvah of lighting candles, you could just light one candle in your household on every single night of Hanukkah. On the first night, one candle, on the second night, one candle, regardless of how many people live in your home. That's the basic fundamental way. And the truth is, if one doesn't have enough candles to do it the other way, that's a perfectly good way to fulfill the mitzvah. We express exceptional devotion to Torah by following the practice of the Mahadrin min ha-Mahadrin, the exceptionally fervent among the fervent, by adding one candle each night, as Beit Hillel, and by having each member of the family light his or her own menorah. On Hanukkah, all of Israel voluntarily accept to go beyond the minimum requirement of the Torah. The practice accepted by the community on Hanukkah demonstrates its passionate love of Torah and mitzvah. So that's also a beautiful idea in and of itself. I'm not sure if we focus on this enough. I think it's the only example when all Jews, regardless of our affiliation, we all do the mitzvah the same way. We all light one candle on the first night, 2 candles on the second night, 3 candles on the third night, which, according to Jewish law, is the most stringent way to fulfill the mitzvah, the most perfect way to fulfill the mitzvah. Everybody fulfills the mitzvah in the most exceptional way, which to me is such a beautiful way to be reminded of our potential for unity and our potential to be together and to celebrate together. Hanukkah, I think it's the only example of this. Making Hidur mitzvah, meaning doing the mitzvah in the most beautiful way, The accepted practice of Hanukkah is befitting a festival where Jews proudly affirm commitment to their particular way of life. So Dr. Hartman takes it in a different direction. I see it as an element of unity. Rabbi Hartman sees it as an element of particularism. We put it. We light the candles in the window. We do it in the most perfect way possible, which is a robust expression that we are committed to our particular way of life, even as we are all part of the general culture around us. All of us. It's impossible not to be. But yet on Hanukkah, like I said, it's that booster where we're reminded of our particularity. I was wondering what you think about this. Hanukkah is obviously early this year, although Hanukkah is never early. Hanukkah is always the same time. It's that December is coming late this year. Sometimes I was thinking that I like that we're not up against Christmas this year with Hanukkah, because it's just us, right? We're just doing our own thing and we're not reflecting on anything else. It's just us. On the other hand, sometimes I like when it's up against Hanukkah, up against Christmas, because that's a way for me to sort of culturally push back and say, no, I'm not, the Christmas is not for me. I have Hanukkah. Now, not that Hanukkah is, came to go up against Christmas. But so sometimes I feel one way, sometimes I feel another way about it. But I think it's interesting that Rabbi Hartman sees Hanukkah, because we all do it in that most robust way, as a nod towards particularism. Hanukkah symbolizes the Maccabean courage to defend Jewish particularity against the threat of cultural monism. We stand firm against cultural totalitarianism, which ridicules the dream of spiritual pluralism and blurs cultural differences between people. Meaning this is, like, when I was growing up, when I was in school, they still taught the theory of the melting pot. But then we've come to realize that the melting pot's really not so nice, because when you melt things, it loses its identity and its shape. So now it's multiculturalism, right? And that is, I think, how Rabbi Hartman sees Hanukkah. I have my celebration of Hanukkah, and I'm not going to let it become diluted. And I'm going to do it in the most robust way. 1 candle, 2 candles, 3 candles, 4 candles in the window, right? And that goes back to what we say in the prayer, Rabim biad ma'atim. God handed the many into the hands of the few, right? Hanukkah is a time to celebrate the ability of minority people, individuals, to maintain their dignity and to maintain their uniqueness and their pride and their glory. It's a beautiful idea. Universality must remain an essential condition of ethics alone, right? We want to treat everyone the same, but when it comes to practice and belief, although our belief in the universal dignity of man created in the image of God must be firm and uncompromising, our attitude toward cultural and spiritual ways of life must express the values of pluralism, which safeguard diversity and individual integrity. So when is universality important? When we recognize that everyone is created in the image of God and everyone has a right to dignity. And then we, at the same time, we have to hold both of things in our head. At the same time, we're able to celebrate a particularism and pluralism when it comes to our cultural and spiritual ways of life. And that's what Hanukkah is about. And I'll end with Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who says something similar. Is there a way forward? He's talking about in a highly polarized world. More than half a century ago, the Oxford philosopher John Plamenotz noted that religious freedom was born in Europe in the 17th century after a devastating series of religious wars. All it took was a single shift from the belief that faith is the most important thing, therefore everyone should honor the one true faith, to the belief that faith is the most important thing, therefore everyone should be free to honor his or own faith. Beautiful. This meant that people of all faiths were guaranteed that whichever religion was dominant, he or she would still be free to obey their own call of conscience. Plamenatz's striking conclusion was that liberty of conscience was born not of indifference, not of skepticism, not of mere open-mindedness, but of faith. The very fact that my religion is important to me allows me to understand that your quite different religion is no less important to you. We often say, and this is the point I think that Rabbi Sachs is making, that faith is the cause of strife and war in the world. And Rabbi Sachs is saying, with a change of perspective, faith is the ultimate source of peace in the world. Right? I love my faith so much, and I should understand that you love your faith equally, and I should let you express it and worship the way you wish to. So for Rabbi Sachs, Hanukkah becomes a holiday of religious freedom, religious pluralism. So these are some of the ideas, the sort of grand ideas that I was thinking about when it came to Hanukkah. Just to quickly review, the idea of looking at the candles and using them to sort of trigger in us inner worship. Even though it's a very public holiday, the original thoughts of the rabbis was that it be about praise and thanksgiving, which are internal. And the candles are just a way to remind us of all the goodness that there is in the world and all the things we should be thankful and grateful for. And then the two big ideas that Rabbi Hartman mentioned is this notion of the leap of action. Make a plan and then go for it, and believe in the moment, whether it's in love, in religion, and again, the beautiful notion from Rabbi Heschel that when it comes to religion, we have to do. And from the doing will come the believing and the devotion. And finally, the idea of Rabim Miad Me'atim, that we celebrate God handing the few into the many into the hands of the few, that Hanukkah becomes a time to recognize that when it comes to honoring people and respecting people, that's universal. But on the realm of social and spiritual ways of life, Hanukkah reminds us of the importance of pluralism and not desiring to fold anyone else's belief or ideas into yours or vice versa, but giving everyone the space to love their faith the same way that we love our faith. So those are my thoughts about courage and pride, which are indeed for me are enduring lessons of Hanukkah. I hope they endure for you too. And I thank you for joining. And the floor is open for any comments or questions. I'll stop the share so I could see everyone's box. And anyone have anything they'd like to add?
Rabbi, if I may make a comment, Neil Calvin. I was
Please.
in Israel in December on a melting tour, December of 17, and as the candles grew brighter every night, I was amazed how closely families drew together. And that is the thing that so stunned me and the beauty of it all.
Well, it's true. Of all the holidays, maybe besides Pesach, I think Hanukkah is the most family oriented because all the other holidays are synagogue based, really. Right? We pray in synagogue on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shabbat. We have meals, of course, but we spend a lot of time praying. But Hanukkah is actually, and it's a really good point you make, Neil, Hanukkah is actually described in the Talmud as a home-based holiday. there's an obligation to light the Chanukiah in your home, to the point that if you're, God forbid, homeless, you may not have to light. Right? If you're on a trip, you're traveling, you're driving through the night, you may now have no obligation to pull over and light a Chanukiah on your hood of your car, because the obligation is on the home. And I guess another time we should use that to talk about homelessness in Judaism on Hanukkah, when it's getting cold out in most places. Maybe next year. Blake.
Hi, thank you. That was fantastic. I learned a lot. And now I'll get to go tell my kids at bedtime everything I learned.
All right.
I have a
Fantastic.
question that is related to Hanukkah, but not necessarily to any of the topics you covered. But
Okay.
I've been asked this for a while. What constitutes assimilation or Hellenization from the perspective of, you know, the Maccabees and Matisyahu and his sons and those who joined him? You know, we live in such an intensely assimilated society. Here I am wearing my Fender guitar hat. You know, we're discussing with my family like where we're gonna have Hanukkah on Sunday so we can watch the Broncos game. And you know, I know many Orthodox rabbis who love baseball. So, like, where do we draw the line?
Yeah, so that is a question that we Jewish people have only been dealing with since the beginning of the Jewish people. And so I think, you know, it's hard to, you know, come up with a 2 or 3 sentence definition of assimilation. I think there are 2 camps within the traditional world in terms of trying to deal with this question. I think one camp, I think, pretends, because I don't think it's really possible, to reject culture and to reject society and claim a fidelity only to the Torah and a rejection of, let's say, Western values or modern values. I don't want to, not necessarily Western, modern values. I think another camp, which I feel more comfortable in, really has to take it on a case-by-case basis, meaning there are elements of, just take American society, which are enriching to us, to all people, Jewish and non-Jewish. They're just simply enriching. And I think it's possible to not only to find space, but to make the claim that those things which are enriching then also have Jewish value in them. And there are things in culture which are not enriching, which are, I'm not sure what the opposite of enriching is, which should be avoided. And it's really a case-by-case situation. There are elements of art which are enriching and elements of art which aren't. There's music which is enriching. There are elements of rap which are enriching and I think thought-provoking and challenging, and elements of that type of music which I don't have a taste for. And the same goes for everything. So I think you can't. I guess the definition is a willingness to accept that those things could be enriching, or the claim that there's nothing good there. I think the claim that's nothing good there, I think, is really hard to defend and false and not really maintained by anybody. So our job is to become as knowledgeable as possible in our tradition by studying as much as possible, so that we have a gauge that we can use when making the decision of what's enriching and what's not enriching. And that's our guide, right? The Torah is our guide. And so every single day we have to make hundreds of these little decisions. You know, is a conversation that I'm involved now. Is that an enriching conversation, or is it, devolved into gossip and, and telling tales? And that's not a conversation I should be involved in. That's an example of what we have to do all the time. But luckily, we have a gauge. It's the Torah, and it's been a steady guiding hand for us for thousands of years, in all situations, in all cultures, in all lands, in all periods of time, whether things were good for the Jews or not good for the Jews. Right? The Torah has always been a sturdy and trustworthy guide. And so, yeah, I hope that's headed towards an answer.
That was an excellent answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I guess I should stop when I'm ahead. But I'm going to take
I
another
have a
question.
comment, just,
Oh, okay, Miriam, I got you next. Go ahead, Rona.
okay, sorry. The comment was just that, I know, the date of Hanukkah is established by the literature, the writings and the, I assume that it's in the texts, but almost every religion has something in the time when it's darkest, when the days are the darkest.
Yeah.
Culturally, and that goes back historically, that when the days are shorter, at least in this
Yeah.
part of the world, when the days are shorter. I can't say for the Southern Hemisphere, but
Right, I'm aware of that.
so it's just
Yeah.
interesting that that's not for a religious reason, comment, but specific to Hanukkah, but it's just an interesting cultural.
Yes. Right, and I think important, because we have this long stretch between, let's say, Sukkot and Passover.
Yeah, we do
So,
actually. Yeah.
Right. So having Hanukkah right in the middle there is helpful. And by the way, Rona is a wonderful example of what I was just talking about before, right? Rona is an artist, and she uses her art to teach Torah, right? She teaches Torah through art, and does wonderful art that is not necessarily
Most of my art is not, but my
Right.
interest
But-
lies there. But
but
my
beautiful and
is-
inspiring and wholesome and worthwhile,
interest,
nonetheless. So, in fact, I was just I don't remember I was reading this today. I was reading this on Facebook. Let me see if I could find it. This is another great example of what I was talking about. Let me see if I could find it. I think I remember whose feed I saw it on. Yeah. So, I'm going to share my screen, and you'll see this Facebook screen. Let's see if I could do this. Yeah, here we go. So, everyone see this this page here?
Uh-huh.
My friend David Walkenfeld, who's a rabbi in Chicago. According to Genesis, light was created on the first day of creation, but the sun and moon were not created until the fourth day. Rashi cites a Midrashic tradition that the primordial light of creation was set aside for the righteous in the world to come. When he was caught in London during World War I, Rabbi Cook told members of his community to visit the National Gallery, because in his estimation, Rembrandt had managed to capture and depict this primordial light of creation. My teacher, Rabbi David Ebner, investigated the story and confirmed that it was only years later that Monet was added to the collection of the National Gallery. Who could be impressed by a Rembrandt who has seen Monet? Wishing you all the happy festival of light. So I think this is the Monet. But the point is that Rav Kook was in the National Gallery looking at art, right? And he found that uplifting and meaningful. So there you go. Okay, go ahead, Miriam.
I was just going to comment that I found your description of Hanukkah as a booster shot kind of interesting, based on its position in the calendar, kind of like in this long, like dark space between holidays.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I hadn't thought about that, but I'm glad you did. Excellent.
But my other questions, you managed to like tie up as you got further into your thing. So well
All right.
done.
Great. Thank you. Well, happy Hanukkah, everyone. It was a great Hanukkah present to me to have the opportunity to study with you. Thank you for joining. I wish you all a enjoyable rest of Hanukkah, and hope to see you all again soon.
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Happy Hanukkah.
You.
Happy Hanukkah. Bye bye.